So today we're going to talk about succession. It's candidly one of the reasons why we got Indivisible Partners started. It is a trend, the reality of the demographic that we all face. We get old, we are getting older, advisors are getting older, business owners are getting older. And so succession becomes a really important fact, coupled with the difficulty in attracting new people to the industry. So we're going to take a little bit different approach. We're not investment bankers. We're going to come about this at a real practical way and really address some of the things that we think don't get talked about near enough. We won't confuse you. We won't be complex, but we are going to be provocative. So we look forward to the conversation with you and can't wait to engage in questions. So Pat, I'll turn it to you.
All right, John, thank you very much. And I echo your gratitude to Advise On and Mike. Really appreciate being here with everyone today and looking forward to spending time. The other insight I'd add to what John just said is we're going to be objective. And, one of the things that we've designed this agenda around is what you've asked us to cover. You want to know, why is this such a hot conversation right now? It seems to be the topic everywhere you go. Whenever you engage with an RIA leader, a team, a firm, they want to talk about this topic. We're going to share the multiple paths that might be confusing so that you understand what each of them actually means and how you could potentially take one or the other of those paths. Ironically, as Mike pointed out initially, the client is sometimes forgotten. They're caught up in the backwash of this whole thing. And we want to make sure that we bring that back to what the client feels and sees and how succession planning can impact them. We want to leave you with some ideas of what good can actually look like. And importantly, we want you to have questions that you're armed with so that as you think about your structure, your intentional process, your plan, you're asking the right questions to find that right path. As Mike said, we'll leave some time for open Q&A. You can pop questions into the chat on the right-hand side as we go. And really importantly, we are going to leave you at the end with a tool that you can use to hold a mirror up to see where you are in the succession planning process. It's a quick, simple, super easy, intuitive assessment. You can do it in about 2 minutes, and it's going to tell you a lot about where you are in this process. So speaking of questions, one of the things that we want to do is ask some as we go. And the first one we're going to do is ask you where you are in thinking about your, if I can get back to, bear with me for a second, my technology is a little wonky. Do you have a written, documented succession plan today? So if you look in the right-hand margin here, if you could answer those questions, we'll do some real-time feedback and surveying of the folks on the call to see where you all land around a written, documented succession plan. I'm fully documented, partially got a general idea, but nothing's written down yet, structured. No, but I know I should. No, and I don't know that I actually need one. So fill out some of those, keep going. We've got a good number of folks so far. Let's keep them coming in. Looks like the two leads right now are partially general idea, but nothing written yet. So, John, as we look at the numbers coming in here, I think this is pretty reflective of what we bump into when we run in this traffic, right? Which is, you've got a handful of people who are really focused on it and have a full documented strategy, structure, and process. Most people fall into those middle two buckets, which is, I've thought about it, but I haven't really written something down. And then the others are, I know I should do this, but I just haven't gotten around to it. That's what you see as well, right? All right, so let's move on to the next question here, which is, why are we having this conversation right now? Well, Cerulli tells us what they've been telling us for about 3 decades, that there's this massive intergenerational wealth transfer. Right now, it's 124 trillion. We've watched that number go up over the past 30 years. When you combine that with the demographics that John talked about earlier, that's a tricky dynamic, right? You've got to have someone to catch that wealth. But the reality is the leaders of these RIA firms, the principals, are getting older. They're in their late 50s. And also combine that with the fact that valuations are changing. Supply and demand, as we look at it, is going to dilute valuations. If you have weak supply, the demand is going to adjust to compress that market. Importantly, the SEC is increasingly focused and explicit on continuity as a fiduciary duty. This is really important because it's new. You have to have a written succession plan around continuity by the SEC standards. And, as we see in the poll, an awful lot of us don't have that. So the window to do all of this is open, but it's not open indefinitely. So we got to be thoughtful about it. And if you just stop practicing tomorrow, not planned, just done, what would happen to those clients that we care so much about in the moment? We're going to get into that in a few minutes, but that's an important thread to weave through this entire conversation. Here's some myths and some realities. We're going to bust some myths for you right now. Myth number one, and you can read Deloitte, you can read McKinsey, you can read Cerulli. This is all validated through an awful lot of the sourcing out there and the research behind it. The myth is that my practice is worth 2 to 3x my revenue. That's the myth. We hear about it all the time when we're talking to folks. The reality is it's probably a much different range. It's probably 1x your value to 4x plus. And earnout structures, and we're going to get into the detail here, those earnout structures often hide the true realized price. That's a hugely important thing to think about. Second myth is, I have a long time to think about this. So as we look back at the poll, I know I should have a plan. I don't have a plan. I don't want to have a plan, or I don't think I need a plan, or I maybe have a partial plan. So I have time to think about it. Well, the reality is, it takes a long time to put a proper succession plan into place, 3 to 7 years on average to execute it. That means all the time it takes to think about your talent pool, to think about your governance, to think about your structure, to think about who the right people are to carry your business and your legacy forward. So you need runway to figure that out. And the final myth here is that clients are going to follow the relationships. That's not always the case. Client attrition in the first 18 months of succession planning, it averages about 10 to 30%. So think about that for a second. 3 out of 10 of your clients may not go with you or may not stick around with the successors. Technology, the change that happens on your business, the brand changes, the new platforms that you're on, all of those things can potentially influence what that client experience feels like, and it's going to drive and influence some of that attrition. So that's a level setter of what we're going to cover today, some of the myths and the realities that we want to dip into here. And now I want to turn it back to John to talk about the paths that we're going to really focus on.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. And maybe the first and most important thing is there is really no single right answer. As we learned early on, is people always like to say that if you've seen one RIA, you've seen one RIA. And to me, that's kind of a compliment, because it says that you have the autonomy and the flexibility to run your business the way you want to, and ideally, meet the client where they are and not have to, meet them where an organization is. So the 3 we're going to talk about are obviously internal succession and everything that goes along with that. It's easier to preserve the culture and ensure continuity. Then obviously the external sale, M&A, that's the one that makes all the headlines and the ones we read about in the different periodicals. So there's some liquidity, and ideally you accelerate scale, not always, but at least that's what we claim. And then you gain some resources, which is for sure the case. And then the last is partner affiliation, where you stay independent, you keep ownership of your business, you gain some capabilities, you create some time and capacity, and of course, ideally, you build for the future. So let's start with internal succession.
Yeah, so when internal succession works, it has a number of things that are lined up pretty seamlessly. You've got your talent pipeline sorted out. The client ownership and those handoffs have been done very thoughtfully and intentionally. That leadership transition, the successor is clear and empowered to carry your shared vision and values forward. And there's a governance structure. This is that written plan with roles and accountability and milestones. The good news is you have all 5 of those things lined up. Internal succession is probably going to work, and it's going to work well. The issue is it's rarely all 5 of those things that are aligned cleanly. And John, when you look at these 5, what are the areas that you see that tend to be the biggest issue?
Well, I think the sort of the elephant in the room is the talent pipeline, because no matter what, this is a people business. We came into this, the assets of this business are you and I, and your ability to serve your clients. So if you listen to McKinsey and Plan Advisor as examples, and McKinsey's got this one down, net new advisors over the last decade, the last 10 years, are 8,000. That's 800 a year. Now, as you're thinking about building a succession plan and attracting talent, that's not just the RIA space. That's everybody in wealth management. So you think about 700,000 advisors, 800 net new. To me, this is something that you really got to spend the time and focus on, and it's going to take work for you to do this. You may have it. That's incredible. Then the only other one I think, which is really important, is the notion that the client understands what's happening and what will happen to them as we move forward. So to me, they're all important, but those 2 are the ones that you just got to get right.
No doubt. And I think, when you flip this around on the internal succession and you look at the hard truth, most plans are really just hopes, right? So there's that old saying, hope is not a strategy. And that tends to be a reality when you're thinking about this. Financing is very often something that's very difficult for G2, the next generation, to think about or to come up with if they're succeeding or buying the G1's business. Client trust is not automatically transferred. It's not some magic thing that just moves from one to the other. It has to be super intentional. I've seen this 1,000 times where you've got someone on the team who's the next generation, who is not introduced to the most important clients. And the senior leader is like, no, we'll get there. We just haven't done it yet. And then when succession happens, that client doesn't have trust in that next generation to actually pick it up. So, and then there's transparency around the conversation where the senior leader hasn't necessarily shared the plan with the next generation in a really specific, explicit way. Any additional thoughts here, John?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a client. I think you're a client. And so when we talk about trust doesn't automatically transfer, it's not that. It's really putting yourself in the shoes of your client. And if you think about what we as clients do, when we basically turn over our life's resources, at least as it relates to financial resources and trust, that's a big commitment. That's something that's really established over time. And so it really necessitates understanding how the client's thinking about this. They are thinking about your succession because they're watching you age along with themselves. So that it's in their mind. It's whether you're having the overt conversation. And so what I would just ask as you think about this is to put yourself in the client's shoes, understand that the trust that's been built wasn't done in a day, and that it's going to take time and it's going to take work, and they get to have a say-so in how that happens.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. So, John, let's turn into the elephant in the room. We hear a lot about the external sale to M&A and valuation. It really, again, is a combination of things that when they come together, it defines high value. Revenue quality, client segmentation, demographics. You've got a really good book that aren't in distribution mode, that are younger and growing, potentially clients. You've got that depth of the team, the talent pool you talked about earlier. Technology is a huge issue. I know you've got a major focus on this in the way you approach this topic. The growth trajectory. Look, regardless of where you read it, every research piece tells us that this is a very slightly growing category. The average RIA business net of the markets is up around 3% in terms of revenue growth. So, there isn't a ton of organic growth in the industry, and that's going to heavily influence valuation. And finally, the geography, your market position, how you're established, how you're positioned, how you're branded in the area that your company exists in or your firm exists. All of those things ultimately is why buyers are going to place a higher valuation on you. Problem is, these issues are not, again, easy to line up, and you may find a gap in one that may influence those valuations more than another. John, I know you have thoughts on technology, especially. So
Well,
when we're thinking about what the buyers are looking at.
Pat, just go back a second. I
Okay.
joked earlier that we're not investment bankers. Well, we aren't. Pat and I aren't. We have that talent. One of our co-founders is. I didn't mean it to be flippant. What I wanted to suggest is there's other factors that are going to decide the valuation of your business. And one of those that we don't think about is the geography and the market positioning. There are pools of wealth. And let me take, who's buying you? A private equity firm, most likely, or a private equity backed aggregator is buying you. So private equity guys, they think of it certain, and ladies think of it a certain way. They're going to look at the two biggest addressable pools of opportunity, which is the 124 trillion that Pat talked about, but it's also the business owner succession market, which is difficult to value, but arguably substantially bigger than that wealth transfer opportunity. And they're going to look and see, as an example, do you have plans in your business and resources to attack that? One of the things that I've heard so much, which makes me sort of ill as a client, is these folks who are out there trying to buy you think of us as fee pools, like fee pool. I'm a fee pool. Like that really kind of bothers me that they're thinking about how much I'm going to pay in fees, and that's how they're going to evaluate me. The point being is that is something that you should think about as you want to drive growth and you want to demonstrate that you're leading. That's going to get you the better valuation on top of some of these other things that you mentioned, Pat.
Can you imagine if a client knew that they were referred to as a fee pool? Can you? I mean,
well, they used to say this is an eat what you kill business, Pat. And I always ask people, like, are you going to kill me and eat me? Really? Like, God, that's awful.
Yeah, that is awful. So as we look behind the external sale, the M&A model on this is very important for everyone that's tuned in today to think about. There's what isn't said until after that letter of agreement or interest or intent is signed, right? I call the earnout the first thing here. 30 to 50% of the deal value is typically contingent on something else, right? It may be contingent on the length of time of the contract. It may be contingent on the retention of the clients that you bring over at a certain percentage. I call this the guaranteed contract that they give to athletes. There's always an asterisk around that, right? When Lamar Jackson signs his contract and there's a giant headline that says, this much was guaranteed, it's never guaranteed. So that earnout is massively important to think about. We're going to talk about client communication, cultural integration. We'll preserve your culture is the most common and least reliable promise on the planet in this space. It's really important to understand the impact of your culture, what your culture is going to look like, the culture you're engaging and integrating with, because invariably the integration of cultures does not work the way that maybe you want it to. And I've had multiple conversations where someone says, the grass looked really green. I've been here for a year, 2 years, and it's actually a lot browner than I thought it was going to be. John, I know you've got great thoughts on the technology migration piece of this.
Yeah, I mean, again, thinking about how you maximize value for the business you own. The buzzword now is artificial intelligence. Everybody's using it. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a technology stack or you're part of something where that data is difficult to access or it's not interoperable, it's not fluid throughout, then AI isn't going to be able to be maximized. And so more and more, you need to be thinking about how you create a clean set of data or a data lake which there are plenty of providers that can help you that, where you can put your data in a place that's easy to organize, and you can maximize the power of AI. So what we're finding is without that, AI is an amazing deck writer. It's an amazing search tool, but to really get the most out of it, I think you're going to have to think about that part of the technology equation. And there are people out there that can help you.
You know, just referencing Future Proof again, John, that giant conference and event that happened down in Miami, and they've got another one in the fall. When I was down there, the technology topic came up, but invariably people were talking about technology as a subscription, not as a strategy. And I think some of what you're talking about is ensuring that everything is connected, everything is interoperable. And usually people are buying vertical subscriptions, not any kind of a broad enterprise-wide strategy. Is that fair?
Yep.
So let's look at another live poll here. And this one is going to be, which outcomes concern you most in an M&A transaction? So we just talked about M&A. We'd love to get your sense for which outcome concerns you most. Is it client attrition after the deal? Is it loss of culture and autonomy? Is it the earnout provisions, some of the stuff we just talked about, not getting full value and fair value? Is it your team and talent departures? Is it that technology disruption that John just dug into? So what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing a lot of client attrition after the deal. Interesting. And loss of culture and autonomy. So the top three here: client attrition after the deal, loss of culture, earnout provisions, not getting full value. You know, they're neck and neck in terms of what people are concerned about. Pretty interesting. What do you see when you look at those three, John?
Well, I think that people are being truthful. These are all risks to any transition. And so the good news about all this is that you feel good about your talent and your ability to retain that talent. That's a huge plus. But all these other things are factors. The good news is, you know, there's ways to prevent the first three from becoming realities with proper planning and a good approach.
Yeah, no doubt. That's interesting. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that. So the third path here that we talked about is partner affiliation. And this is where you've got a platform that's going to handle the infrastructure, compliance, technology, perhaps marketing, consulting, growth, partnership, and helping you achieve the business plans that you have laid out for you. And it doesn't require that liquidity event that we've talked about. And there are lots of questions that you should be thinking about to evaluate that platform partner in this model, right? There's equity participation. There's the technology that we've leaned heavily into. What does it look like if you want to leave? What does exiting look like from a platform like that look like? What's autonomy? What can go wrong? How do you get paid? There's a lot of different angles, John. This is one that you have a great insight into because it's really what you built.
Yeah, I have a very strong point of view on this. And, you know, we believe there's a lot of people, whether you're completely independent or you're part of otherwise, at some point in time, you may get to the point where you don't want to do some of the things that you have to do to run a business. And there are plenty of people who want to, and that's why there's no right or wrong answer here. But for those of you who want to do that, what we don't also have to do when you decide to partner with somebody for some of these, let's call it general manager duties like compliance and technology, you don't have to sell your growth. And what we see, and it's mind-boggling to me, is people will sell some of the growth when it's the greatest asset they own. You have this incredible business you've built. If you can grow it, it becomes much more valuable. And when you sell that now, I think you're shortchanging yourself. Like if we all went back to 5 years ago, it's July 2021. It was the dreaded COVID time. So which one of us honestly would have thought that 5 years later, we'd be sitting here with levels on the NASDAQ, the S&P, and seen the business absolutely explode 5 years ago. Well, for the next 5 years, how can we predict that? If you had sold your growth in that year because the world was ending, of course it wasn't, think how much that cost you. So that's another thing to add into this is we just implore you to own your growth. You've worked so hard to get there. Why sell it too soon?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm talking to a team right now that is growing at a really significant pace, and they're looking at a couple of different options. And I've said that to them, and it was like a light bulb went off. They realized that what the price is that they're getting quoted right now versus where they're going to be in 5 years. It's a great deal for the buyer, not so much for the seller. So thanks for that insight, John. You know, this is a fifth different path, if you will, that we wanted to make sure we were also touching on, or fourth different, excuse me, which is when the advisor becomes the acquirer, right? So this is where you think about a tuck-in or a bolt-on. When you're growing your team, you're creating your succession plan by bringing a new team onto yours and expanding that way. Importantly, you must have that cultural practice fit. Make sure the economics are clean and you know what you're buying and what the value is that you're getting. The people risk is obviously one that you need to be keenly focused on, so that you're not bringing an expanded team in that you don't understand all of the specifics on in terms of who's who and what they've done and how they operate. And your own capacity. When I was at Future Proof, again, one of the other topics that came up all the time was firm leaders who were saying, I want to sit with clients in a conference room or across a dining room table. I don't want to be a COO. I don't want to be a CAO. I don't want to be a CCO. I don't want to be a CMO. I would like to spend time with my clients. So capacity is a huge issue here. When you're bringing people on and you're building your business, just bear in mind that it may impact your ability to spend time focusing on your clients while you're spinning these other plates. So thoughts on this one, John?
Well, I mean, it's the leadership question, right? I mean, I think back to when I took over Merrill Lynch. One day I had 11 peers. The next day, 10 of them worked for me. So that's a very different dynamic. So if you all are out there acquiring, you do have to be a leader and you do have to manage all 5 of these categories. And so not that you can't and not that you won't be great, but you need to think about it differently and just, be mindful of what you're taking on. So I had a funny little thought. I was watching House of Dragons the other night, and Rhaenyra has become queen and she's sitting on the Iron Throne, and she's like basking her glory and planning for her, whatever you call it, right? The celebration as queen. But the next day there's a line of petitioners, about 100 people long, all asking for something and whining about something. And like, that's the reality of leadership, right? So what we're just saying is, when you go out to do that, just be eyes wide open, that there are things that you're going to have to do that you may not want to do.
I haven't heard House of Dragons or Game of Thrones analogies made in our business, John, but I'm buying it big time. That's awesome. So let's pivot in, and Mike started the whole conversation with this. Let's start to talk about this great irony, which is the client that might get forgotten to some degree in this whole dynamic, right? So succession planning, the sale, the agreement, it's all optimized for the advisor, right? The financials, the impact, the timelines, that tends to be all focused and tilted toward the advisor. What's not optimized for the client is whatever hasn't been discussed, whatever hasn't been considered. What are the impacts? What are the things that are going to happen? Think about when you change your dentist, or you change your doctor, or you change your accountant or your lawyer. The deep relationship, the personal insights, the financial information that they may have, and obviously that you all have, is a massively upheaving thing for a client that lives through this. So what does this look like? Well, when your client's in the middle of an experience, the brand may change, right? It might have a different look and feel on the website. The portal may change. The access to a mobile app may be different. The investment process, communication cadence might be altered. This happened with me as a client. My CSA, who I loved for 20 years, the CSA that I was working with on my advisors team, left, and they were replaced with somebody else. And it took me a long time to grow that trust. Uncertainty about minimums and fees, new service teams and models. This is so important that the client experience be considered as part of whatever changes here. So there's an irony here that I just can't get over. So, John, what is your perspective on kind of the
one
impact?
observation, and I feel sorry for my advisor because I probably tortured him because I know more about how his business works than he does probably, and I have seen lots of movies, if you will. But listen, at the end of the day, if you're going to do a transition, you're selling my willingness to continue to find value in the service and the advice and pay fees. At the end of the day, that's what's happening, right? You're looking at all the fees that a business has, you're projecting, you're doing a present value calculation, you're putting a multiple on it. So in my mind, I get a vote. And I'm not saying that every client feels this way, but if you take that mindset that I just explained to you, I think you're way better equipped for having empathetic conversations with clients on this topic, because it really is, it can be very disruptive. And most of us don't deal with change as well as we'd like to suggest.
Yeah, there's a saying I love, which is a confused mind always says no. And the more you confuse a client in this transition, the more likely they are to find a different option. So, one of the things to think about is, with the version of the practice that you started, would you be proud of how it ends? And the succession planning model is just like what we do for our clients in terms of giving them a plan, giving them a destination, and asking them to think about looking back at where they started and where they want to end up. I think that's an important insight for all of us to consider. So what good client-centric succession looks like is continuity. It's technology that is client-friendly, user-friendly. It's relationship consistency with the people that they're used to seeing and hearing on the other end of the phone or on the screen. It's transparency and communication, so that when you're going through this, they hear it from you first. That's not always managed as effectively as it could be. Service levels go up ideally. Otherwise, they're sometimes curious as to why you might be making a move like this that's not necessarily good for their service. And do the values in the broader network, the platform that you're sitting on, align with yours? So that's really what good client-centric succession looks like. Any additional there, John?
No, I think that you said it well.
So let's move just into the questions. We talked about this at the beginning to make sure that you're armed with those questions. It needs to be questions around client experience and retention, right? So where M&A is concerned, what does it look like if you want to get out in the exit bucket here? What does that cultural piece look like? We talked a lot about economics. What does retention of clients look like 2 years down the road? Talk to someone who's gone through it. Make sure that you're really clear on what the client experience is, that people like you who have made this decision have experienced and made. So insights on some of the questions you would ask, John?
I mean, this, and you're going to go on, the theme that I would just bucket this in is, as you think about this, you can bucket into three categories: the flexibility, maintaining the flexibility that you have and you expect; two, the autonomy to make those decisions on your own wherever this thing ends up; and then finally, making sure that the standard of service is at least as good as what you're walking away from. Because when those break down, that's when, in my experience, people get frustrated and maybe rethink their decision.
No doubt. And then on the partners and platform affiliation side, again, autonomy is huge. When you move on to a partnered or platform, like the one that we have, what's your autonomy look like? Who owns your clients? Who owns your business? What does it look like longer term? Real world experience is all about talking to people who are there and ensuring that you understand what they've gone through, what the transition looked like, what the client retention or attrition looked like. And again, what are the exit options? Because the longer you lock yourself up in a deal, the more limited you are in potentially exiting in timing that might serve you and your clients. So I think these are hugely important areas to think about. And again, lots of this is going to be covered in the assessment tool that we share with you at the end here. Additional thoughts here, John?
No, I think we should get to the Q&A.
All right, final question, and then we will get to the Q&A. So where are you in your thinking about practice continuity right now? So are you actively evaluating your options? Are you starting to think about it? It's on your radar, but it's not urgent. You have a plan. You're looking for a validation. So we're going to get to the questions that you've asked in the chat, and we're also going to, as I said, share a really useful tool for you at the end. Actively evaluating options, starting to think about it seriously, on the radar, but not urgent. So it looks like the first three are neck and neck. Actively evaluating options is taking over here a little bit, starting to think about it. Well, good. I mean, I hope that this therefore has been insightful. We are going to open it up and we're going to go back to your questions in the chat. John, there have been lots of questions coming in here. And as I said, one of the things we're going to share at the end, Mike, is this QR code and linked tool that I think will be enormously helpful for people. So let's make sure we stick around. But let's start to dig into the questions, John, on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
So Mike will let you lead this.
Yeah, perfect. Really appreciate that, guys. So as I mentioned earlier, if you do have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can here. We've had quite a few come in already, but kind of a general theme that's come through the chat already. Could you guys just talk about that when you think about these three different paths that these firms go down for succession planning? Does size of the firm, AUM, number of employees, does that really factor into maybe which path may be better? Could you just speak to that at all?
I don't know if again, it's hard to say if it's better. I do think as you get very large, sometimes financing options are going to require outside money. And if you don't want that, that can affect it. The good news is these are wonderful cash flowing businesses. There'll always be plenty of people out there making a bid. But again, I really think it's about how you want to leave it and who you want to leave it to. That will ultimately determine the right choice.
Got it. Couple of questions that come in, really straightforward one. What if I haven't identified a successor yet? Any kind of advice for someone in that situation?
Well, I mean, I don't know. There's probably not a lot of specificity in the context of that question. So that's going to always be helpful. But I really think it's taking inventory of what your values are and what are important to you, and then looking for that in other people on your team or or in the community or somewhere in the industry. And so when you think about going to some of the conferences that you sponsor and other people sponsor, that may be a good way to do that. But if you take a good inventory of what good looks like to you based on what you've done, I think is a great archetype to use to attract talent.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think values are foundational. I think acumen, expertise, I think timeline, experience, all of that is going to be enormously helpful as someone assesses what their successor can look like.
Yeah, makes sense. You hit on a bunch of factors that kind of go into evaluating the transition, the succession, technology being a key one of those. We didn't touch much on custodians and how if two firms have different custodian relationships, how kind of that plays into the transition at all. Could you speak to that a bit?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're making some kind of transition, the least amount of disruption is better. So if you're comfortable with the custodian and where you're going or who you're affiliating with or you don't require a custodian change, that's great. But I think what custodian choice does provide, and most people have multiple custodians, is a client-focused approach to what custodian would serve that particular client and you best. So I think there's enough flexibility in those choices. But again, if you're at one place and you're not unhappy, obviously making the transition is probably easier to do without change. But then over time, if you want to add capabilities and that's a conversation you can always have with the client, I believe, especially when it's better for the client.
Yep. Makes sense. Couple of questions came through about typical earnout structures. Maybe just, could you guys touch on that just briefly, maybe?
Yeah. So, the earnout pool can be pretty substantial. As Pat said, it can be, between 35 or 25 and 45% of the deal. At least those are the most recently reported versions of that. They're gonna plan on a 95% AUM retention, which I think is accurate. If you're doing a good job for your clients, you've got a good shot of that. They typically carve out a down market, so you get some protection there, and they might layer in some growth equity if you grow over a certain hurdle rate. But the rollover equity is also going to be a part of this, right? Not just the earnout, but they're going to ask you to participate in the equity of their business. So you think about it, you get cash, you get some earnout, and then it's likely that they're going to ask you to take equity as some of the value of the deal for that quote unquote second bite of the apple. But again, to be sort of blunt, it's usually, 55-65% cash, and then the rest is going to be earn out and rollover equity.
Got it. A lot of questions coming through. I'm just trying to read through them all. Which one? Scroll up here a bit. So pretty straightforward. So, could you talk a little bit about Indivisible and basically how you guys help out anyone who's interested in succession planning and all of that?
Yeah, so we have an experienced leadership team where we did a lot of this our whole career. It's one of the reasons we felt like we could, we're free consultants, really, the way you look at it. We've helped multiple teams do this in our former lives at different institutions. So we absolutely will walk hand in hand with people to help them identify that talent, help them develop that talent. If it's a transition that's happening, one of the firms that joined us was in the middle of a transition and couldn't make a decision. We bumped into them at a conference, and they joined us. We help them with the actual transaction, help them structure it, make it as tax effective as possible. You help them arrange for financing and things like in components like that. So it's soup to nuts. I did see some questions about, hey, but you can still sell some and be autonomous. And the answer is absolutely right. I mean, if you want to sell a little piece of your business, you can absolutely do that. There are plenty of capital sources for that. What I don't think you have to do is choose somebody because that's what they're willing to do and then have to give up on other things, other elements that are important to you. Because it's a discrete transaction. There's people out there with capital that will buy a piece of a growing cash flowing business that don't have to get in your business all day. To me, you want to avoid the person who makes a financial investment and then wants to tell you what to do or try to tell you what to do. So to me, if you're going to do that, you just make sure that you preserve all your autonomy.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that. John, coming from the wirehouse, and I was in that business for 20 plus years. It was a breath of fresh air to get into the RIA world. And then I found an irony that some of the RIA world, when they were selling their business, it started to feel more like the business that they had left in the wirehouse world to become an RIA, because they no longer owned 100% of their business, their future, their outcomes, their structure, their succession plan, and all that good stuff. So I think that's a really interesting irony, and one that people need to consider pretty thoughtfully before they do it.
Awesome. Couple of questions that came through more like specific to individuals' businesses. So we'll probably look to take some of those offline. I know we're going to make you guys available for anyone who wants to have further conversations. And then, Pat, I think we had a QR code or something that we were going to surface as we look to wrap this up.
Yeah, we sure do. And again, Mike, if anyone has specific questions and they share their information with you, you can share it with us, and we're happy to follow up on any questions that we weren't able to get to today. So